Bounty originally aired the same night as First Flight, the celebratory 50th episode of Enterprise. This was part of their May sweeps attempt, where they pitched this doubleheader to the audience as follows. Celebrate 50 episodes with Enterprise, and after that, how will the Enterprise crew handle T'Pol in heat? They went for landmark and sex, which is no surprise when you remember that the sweep attempt in October of that season was A Night in Sickbay, which also had sex as one of its main pillars. But let's try not to remember that dreck and move on to the episode. While Enterprise is enjoying some research and R&R, well, I guess that would be R&R, a Tellarite ship shows up. Now, this is the first time we've seen them since Star Trek IV. Mentioned lots of times, but not seen. And I'll give them this. The makeup's a good improvement, and it kicks off with the notable Tellarite arrogance as he demands to know what the hell Archer and Trip were out doing rock climbing on one of their planets. But I guess we're exploring and relaxing on it is good enough for him, because suddenly he's gushing about all the places Archer just has to visit. And if he gets a bracelet, he can come back tomorrow and get half-price admission. Well, Archer's sold with that. He'll take our new friend as a tour guide on this magical voyage. But what he doesn't realize is that this guy is a bounty hunter, and he must have come prepared. He shoots Tucker immediately, which leaves Archer to fight him. And knowing that Archer is useless in a fight, he quickly knocks him out and shoots him too. After that crap opening song, all the competent people on board start dealing with this fiasco. Hoshi picks up the weapons fire. Malcolm immediately sends in security to handle it. But alas, Captain Glassjaw goes down too quickly for them to get there, and the Tellarite shoots one of the nacelles on his way out of the system, so they're going to need a little bit of time before they can pursue. But everyone's called back from the planet, including Phlox and T'Pol, who have some kind of microbe for their subplot. If only the decon gel would kill it, it would spare us this bitter cup. Bounty is the last of the original direction of Enterprise. The following episode, The Expanse, would set it in an entirely new direction that would last to the end of Season 3. And Season 4 is essentially Enterprise 2.0. So in many ways, Bounty is Enterprise's shades of gray, getting the awful out of our system so we can move on to something more worthwhile. Or perhaps more accurate, that it's one last mouthful of sewerage before The Expanse can rinse it out. The A-plot is the low end of mediocre. Archer was in a not too dissimilar situation with Trip in Canamar, an episode that was also superior to this one and didn't have Berman and Braga's names listed as writers. What a surprise. The microbe isn't dying from theta radiation, so they're going to have to break out the decon gel again. You've seen it, and you can't unsee it. So the two proceed to slather that stuff all over themselves, intercutting between T'Pol's tan thighs and Phlox's whiter shade of pale gut. And to show just how powerful the sexual drive can become, T'Pol is momentarily turned on by the sight of his spinal gills, or whatever those are. And it's so hard not to write that in a bad fanfic form, because this is a bad fanfic that someone happened to film, except Phlox would probably have washboard abs and the little Danubulin is barbed like a cat or something. Archer's plot requires a bit of backstory. He was captured and tried by the Klingons at one point and sentenced to Ruapenthe, the prison from which no one ever escapes, which he managed to escape. Now, spoiler warning, because I do not want to give away the awesome climactic escape from the inescapable prison. Okay, ready? Ready for this? Okay, Archer managed to escape by just walking out. But man, what a climax! So there's a bounty on him now, and Ugly McFugly has come to collect. And he's got some tricks, like a false sensor beacon to draw the pursuing Enterprise off course. Alright, step 1, we shut down that beacon. Step 2, we analyze it for information that might lead us to the captain. Well, I guess I should be grateful this isn't a Tech episode. It's the opposite. It's the slap things with our dicks episode. Back on the ship, Archer tries offering double what the Klingons are offering, reasoning that he's too valuable to Starfleet to be allowed to be captured. Good luck with that. It doesn't matter anyway, because Boba Fett's Ugnaught cousin isn't buying it, or that Archer is an innocent man. Besides, even if he is, he needs the money to get back his old ship. The Klingons confiscated it for crossing their space. That's why he's stuck bounty hunting instead of the far cooler job of carrying freight. This is basically the recurring conversation. You should let me go. I won't let you go. You should let me go. I won't let you go.
We will not let you go. Let him go. Bismillah. We will not let you go. Let me go. We'll not let you go. Let me go. We'll not let you go. Let me go.
I
I'm just a doctor, nobody loves me. He's just a doctor with a bob-ding-a-ling.
The reason T'Pol's not too happy with Phlox is that she's trying to meditate to stave off her growing yearnings while Phlox keeps shining lights at her until she demands to be let out, which he won't do because she'd contaminate the ship. Finally, she goes to option B, coming on to Phlox. Yeah, things are just that desperate.
You have no idea what you're denying yourself.
Viva Las Vulcan! Braga had talked about T'Pol having her first Ponfar several times long before this episode came out, with all the maturity that you'd expect the topic would be given. None whatsoever. First, to get this out there, it was explicitly stated that it was something the males undergo. Star Trek III made it clear. Now, I'm not bringing this up to say continuity error, even though it is, but as an illustration of the attitude, because I'm pretty certain the producers were not giddily discussing Tuvok's Ponfar. They didn't even address it until Season 7, in the B-plot of an episode that was so ludicrous it made you forget the other part was even there. Now, the ironic part is that Voyager did bring it up, but only to somehow give it to Torres, leading to, let me remind you if you have forgotten, a guy trying to beat a woman into unconsciousness so he could have sex with her while 3 men watched, or as it's known in Star Trek, feminism. But I'll give Blood Fever this. It was part of an overall development of a relationship between Torres and Paris, and one which was being developed at the time, showed how Torres was already attracted to Paris, and it showed that Paris was a decent guy who wouldn't take advantage of her in her current state. Bounty, just like the sexual subtext of A Night in Sickbay, comes from nowhere and goes nowhere. What's more, Amok Time didn't have Spock running around the ship looking to bed someone, right? But T'Pol gets it, and suddenly we have an entire plot of me so horny. Now, I'm not the most politically correct guy there is, but even I can see that's a pretty shitty thing to do, especially because the Ponfar is nothing more than a flimsy justification, even though this is caused by a microbe triggering a condition she supposedly would already experience, which, again, she shouldn't, because at least when something like, say, the Naked Now did it, at least it affected everybody. Tasha wasn't just one of many people we knew was boning anything that moved. This is little more than a germ makes T'Pol want to hump. Well, Enterprise has another first. They are the first Star Trek to deliberately create their own porn parody of themselves. And this isn't shown from T'Pol's perspective. This is as perceived by the men around her, which is not only disempowering for women because it means that their sexuality is only a factor in how it affects the guys. I mean, just hear T'Pol's dialogue, and imagine if it was Riker talking to Dr. Crusher, and see if it doesn't become incredibly creepy. We're talking about a disease here, a disease that is causing mad ramblings, but that's not what we're getting. We're not creating a situation where we're to empathize with T'Pol. T'Pol is there to titillate and amuse us. And guys, we don't get off scot-free in this either. The very inclusion of it makes us look bad because it feeds into the stereotype that this is what male science fiction fans want and is the level of our sexual maturity.
You don't come off in that story as well as you think you do.
Let's be clear, we're not talking about no funsies or anything like that, but rather, we're talking about if you say the show is going to be more adult, you should approach it with an adult attitude, not an adolescent one. It's fine to fantasize. It's healthy to fantasize, actually. There's no problem if you want to imagine that you're trapped with a man or woman of your choice in a situation that leads to erotic delight. Although I certainly hope it's not because they're being influenced in some way. I mean, for God's sakes, how low is your self-esteem if in your own fantasy, where you control the entire world, even then the person of your dreams will have no interest in you unless you mind control them? Look, I'm not saying that there's not a time and place for titillation in fiction, but rather the idea is that there is a big gulf between being puritanical and being puerile. If you want to make things a bit more adult, don't act childish.
Before, what you're trying to do was called negging. It was called reverse psychology, and incels didn't invent it. Bugs Bunny did.
I'm just going to give you the gist of the rest of this subplot. T'Pol keeps getting more mental until she breaks out, tries to seduce Reed, who's wearing a spacesuit to protect himself, and gets zapped into unconsciousness, which is the only way to appreciate these scenes. Back on the bounty hunter ship, a second bounty hunter shows up who also wants Archer. He's a popular guy, unlike in the real world. During the battle, the ship is damaged, so Archer volunteers to fly it while the bounty hunter makes repairs, which the Tellarite thinks is a horribly stupid idea. But Archer insists that he can help, which is all the more reason to keep him locked up, since Archer helping often makes things worse. In this case, he takes it out of warp and flies into an atmosphere, although in this case it manages to work, disabling the other ship and this one at the same time. But a stalemate's as good as a win, right? So they sit down, and of course Archer is allowed to help repair the ship, and while we're working, let me entertain you with my backstory. We're best pals now, right? Well, during all that, Archer works on damaging the engine, and I must congratulate the creators of the episode. They had the villain point out that it would be stupid to trust Archer, and then they prove him right. Next up, the Klingons say it'd be stupid to give Archer all their guns, and then they do it anyway. It's remarkably easy to get your character out of trouble by just making the villains do things so idiotic, even they can't help but comment on it. To round out this whole great brush with Archer, he stops by the station where his brother works in order to pick up some replacement parts. And this reunion is met with a hearty piss off, and then news that the old cargo ship isn't worth recovering because the Klingons picked it clean. So Archer offers the chance to get revenge against the Klingons. And why not trust Archer? It's only been 5 minutes since he last betrayed you. Gotta move on. Stop living in the past, man. So the Tellarite contacts Enterprise to pick up Archer, but then he turns him over to the Klingons, but only after putting him in restraints that are not only rigged to open when Archer wants them to, but has a hidden compartment holding a door override for him to escape his cell. Just had those sitting around, I guess. They used to belong to Space Houdini, I think. Shockingly, Archer managed to eventually overpower one of his Klingon guards and gets away in an escape pod. You might recall that in our previous review of Enterprise, Sleeping Dogs, an important plot point was that Klingon ships do not have escape pods, as that would be dishonorable. But it wouldn't be as dishonorable as leaving no exit for your leading man, am I right? With a firefight and a quick pickup by Enterprise, he's saved. T'Pol recovers, and the bounty hunter shares their banter, and thank God this is over. Post-episode follow-up, annoying character goes to T'Pol, continuing B&B's theme of character assassination of their own creations. You'd think they were trying to burn the show down for the insurance money. Final score for Bounty is 1 out of 10. Even if there was no subplot, this would have at best been a 3, but the subplot is like cinder blocks tied to the ankles. This episode is at best boring and at worst just plain uncomfortable. It's an avatar for Enterprise at its most banal, although Braga might have mistakenly heard anal and thought it was a compliment. It's not. This episode combines hack storytelling at its most unimaginative with a hatred for women which could only be achieved if your family was murdered by angry tampons. Even in a series that thought the height of comedy is raping one of their own cast, this managed to surprise me. It's the first Trek episode I've seen where the credit should have included based on something I left in a sock.
All hail the Overlord! All hail the Overlord!
You have the cure. It's unethical for you to withhold it, Doctor.